Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah. Here we're holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Aleph, and we will be learning today Emir Tzashem Daf Kuf Amid Beis. We are continuing to learn Birchas Krias Shema, and we pick up today in Siman Samach Vav Sif Daled, bottom line on Daf Kuf Amid Aleph. We are continuing to discuss the question of where and when you are allowed to be mafsik, you're allowed to interrupt your recitation of Birchas Krias Shema or of Krias Shema itself. Sif Daled, says the Mechaber. Kohen, Shahaya Kairei Krias Shema. Let's say a Kohen is davening in shul and he's running a little bit late. He's a little bit behind the tzibur, so he's in the middle of saying Krias Shema. Ukra'u likrais b'Torah, and the Gabbai calls him up for Kohen. The tzibur is up to Krias HaTorah, and they call this Kohen up for Kohen. What should he do? He's in the middle of saying Krias Shema. Or we're going to see he's in the middle of Birchas Krias Shema. What is he supposed to do? Well, Mechaber brings down a machlokes. Yesh mi she'omer shemafsik. He brings down, there are those that say that the Kohen should be mafsik, and he should go up to take the aliyah. V'yesh mi she'omer she'enoi mafsik. And there are those that say that he should not go up to take the aliyah. V'halacha kidvarav. And the Mechaber paskins like the second Yesh mi she'omer, that you should not be mafsik in Birchas Krias Shema or in Krias Shema to go take the aliyah. Now, a very short and succinct sif here in Shulchan Aruch, but there's a lot between the lines. Why are we talking about a Kohen? How about a Levi? How about a Yisrael? Are we the Mechaber only mentions Krias Shema? He doesn't mention Birchas Krias Shema. Are we talking about Bein HaProkim? Are we talking about Be'emtza HaProkim? So there's a lot here between the lines that didn't come out, and it's all going to come out here in the Mishnah Berurah. So let's go back to the Kuf Amid Aleph near the bottom in the Mishnah Berurah. Mishnah Berurah, Ois Katan Chaf Daled. Says the Chavetz Chaim. The Mechaber said, Kohen Shahaya Kairei Krias Shema. So the Mechaber spoke about a Kohen who is in middle of Krias Shema. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Ois Shahaya Oisek Beberchai Seha. We're also speaking here about Birchas Krias Shema, not just Krias Shema. Ubein shehu oimed be'emtza perek oy bein haprokim. And we're talking here about somebody who's holding bein haprokim in middle of the different sections or chapters of Birchas Krias Shema and Krias Shema, or he's holding be'emtza haprokim, he's holding smack in the middle, all the same. That means that when the Mechaber says that there's a first Yesh mi she'omer that says that you could go up and you could take the aliyah, that means even if you're in middle of Krias Shema, even if you're be'emtza haprokim of Krias Shema, so you're smack in the middle of a haya im shamaya, and the Gabbai calls you up for an aliyah, the first Yesh mi she'omer would hold that you're allowed to go up and take the aliyah. And the other way also, the second Yesh mi she'omer that's machmir and says that you're not allowed to go take the aliyah, he says you're not allowed to go take the aliyah even if you're in the middle of Birchas Krias Shema and you're bein haprokim. So you just said Baruch Atah Hashem Yoitzer HaMa'oros, you're bein haprokim of Birchas Krias Shema. The second Yesh mi she'omer says you're not allowed to go up for the aliyah. Continues the Chavetz Chaim. The Kasav Ha'el Rabbah of the Derech HaChaim. The El Rabbah and the Derech HaChaim write, the Bein Geula L'Tfila, that between Gal Yisrael and Shemona Esrei, Lo Yala Afilu Im Kira'uhu, then you're never allowed to go up, even if they called you up, even according to the first Yesh mi she'omer, between Geula and Tfila, you're not allowed to be mafsik, and over there everybody would agree you can't go up to take the aliyah. The Ein Tzarich Loimar Be'emtza Shemona Esrei, and certainly in the middle of Shemona Esrei you cannot go to take the aliyah. Okay, we turn to Kuf Amid Beis, Mishnah Berurah is Katan Chaf Hey. So again, the first Yesh mi she'omer said that you are allowed to be mafsik. Ois Katan Chaf Hey Shamafsik. Now, what would the reason be? What would the rationale be to say that you're allowed to be mafsik in the middle of Birchas Krias Shema, in the middle of Krias Shema, even be'emtza haprokim, you're allowed to go be mafsik to take an aliyah? Why? So the answer is very interesting. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Daha mipnei kavod habriyos v'yirasa mafsik. We already learned that you're mafsik for kavod abrius and for necessary yireh, for showing appropriate awe, yireh, for a bas of Adam, the chanal, like we saw earlier. Where did we see that earlier? Very simple. We saw that in the beginning of the Siman, Tzadik Tes Amud Beis, this Siman Samach Vav, Sif Aleph. What did we say over there? Right? We said over here that you're allowed to be mafsik even be'emtza haprokim, in middle of Krias Shema. You're allowed to be meishiv shalom to somebody la'adam nichbad. So to a person that you have to be mechabed, you're allowed to be mafsik in middle of Krias Shema, even be'emtza haprokim. You're allowed to be mafsik. You're allowed to initiate. You're allowed to respond to a greeting, and you're even allowed to initiate a greeting, right, to somebody shehu yarei mimenu, somebody like aviv or rabbi. You're even allowed to initiate a greeting, be'emtza haprokim. So over here, what are we speaking about? Over here, we're speaking about going up to the Sefer Torah because they called you up for an aliyah. That's kavod HaTorah. So if you're allowed to be mafsik be'emtza haprokim, l'chvayid a bas of Adam, certainly you're allowed to go be mafsik for kavod HaTorah. So that's the rationale why you should be allowed to be mafsik to go take an aliyah. Let's see it inside. We already saw earlier that there are times that you're allowed to be mafsik, even be'emtza perek, even be'emtza pasuk, in middle of Krias Shema for kavod abrius. The choshked mipnei kavod HaTorah. So certainly you should be allowed to be mafsik for kavod HaTorah. They called you up to the Sefer Torah to go make a bracha. That's kavod HaTorah. Ulefizeh, according to this rationale, says the Chavetz Chaim, afilu karu Yisrael la'alois l'Torah gam kein mafsik. If this is the rationale, then it makes no difference if you're talking about a Kohen or Yisrael. What's the difference? The point is, you're allowed to go be mafsik in your Krias Shema because going up to the Sefer Torah to make a bracha is kavod HaTorah, and you're allowed to be mafsik for kavod HaTorah. It's not negeya if you're a Kohen or a Levi or a Yisrael. So even if you're a Yisrael, what's the difference between a Kohen and a Yisrael? Well, by a Kohen, you might be afraid that if the Kohen doesn't go up, there isn't another Kohen to go up. But by Yisrael, there's definitely another Yisrael that could go up. But says the Mishnah Berurah, according to this rationale, it makes no difference. Kohen, Levi, Yisrael, it's not negeya. You're allowed to be mafsik because you're being mafsik for kavod HaTorah. Afilu be'emtza Krias Shema. So why did the Mechaber say Kohen? Explains the Chavetz Chaim, v'lo nokat al Shulchan Aruch Kohen. The only reason the Shulchan Aruch specifically addressed the case of a Kohen is rak mishum revusa the hayesh oimrim hasheni. It's only because of the chiddush of the second yesh oimrim, the yesh oimrim that's more machmir, shesvir lehu de einoi mafsik. The second yesh oimrim says that you're not mafsik. Oh, over here, Kohen is a bigger chiddush. Now, Kohen is a bigger chiddush for two reasons. First of all, if you're not mafsik for the Kohen, if the Kohen isn't going to be mafsik, you might not have another Kohen. So you might end up having a Yisrael b'mkayim Kohen, which is not l'chatchila if you have a Kohen. So that's one chiddush. Then there's another chiddush. By a Kohen, there's a potential problem if you call him up and he doesn't come up. And that is, if you call him up and he's not mafsik to go up, it might bring about questions on his yichus. Somebody might say, oh, you know why he's going up? Maybe they're not really sure if he's a Kohen. Maybe there's something wrong with his yichus. So to tell a Kohen not to be mafsik in Krias Shema, to go up to an aliyah, that's a chiddush. First of all, it means they might not find another Kohen. Second of all, you might be risking being pageya in his yichus. So says the Chavetz Chaim, that's why the Mechaber addresses the case of a Kohen, to tell you a chiddush according to the second yesh mishaymer who's machmir, and says do not be mafsik to take the aliyah. So v'lo nokat al Shulchan Aruch Kohen rak mishum revusa da yesh omer masheni shesfir ludeina mafsik afilu b'kohen v'taimam. Now, we saw the rationale for the yesh mishaymer that says that you are mafsik for an aliyah. The rationale over there is kavod HaTorah. If you're allowed to be mafsik v'kavod HaBrius, your zechus are allowed to be mafsik v'kavod HaTorah. What's the rationale for the second yesh misha omer that's machmir and says do not be mafsik for an aliyah? Says the Chafetz Chaim, v'taimam, their reasoning is dein zeh bezoyin l'Torah. It's not a slight to the Torah HaKdosha if you don't go up for the aliyah. Because everybody sees this fellow is sitting and davening. So they know why he's not going up. It's not pshat that he's standing there lounging around and he says, nah, I don't want the aliyah. Chas v'chalila. That would be pageh b'kavod HaTorah, that would be b'zayin HaTorah. But this person is sitting and he's davening and he's saying Krias Shema. And when the Gabbai calls him up, he goes, you can't go up. So everybody understands why he's not going up. So that's not a b'zayin l'Torah. The Gam, and furthermore, afal pishu kayin, even when we're dealing with a kayin, ein lachash lipgamai, we don't have to worry that we're going to make a pagam in his yichus. Im lo yala, if he doesn't go up, sheyitziu alav laz shehu pasal, where people might speak about him, they might wag their tongues, and they might say he's really pasal for the kahuna. We don't have to worry about that. Again, for the same reason. Because people realize that the reason he's not going up is because he's holding the middle of davening in a place where you're not allowed to be mafsik. So ein bazeh pkam. So there's no pkam. V'yedu hakoil, and everybody will know and realize that this is the reason he's not going up. V'oila afilu Yisrael b'mekaymai im ein kan kayin acher. And according to this second yesh misha omer, even if we're talking about a kayin, the kayin won't go up, and if there's no other kayin, they'll call up a Yisrael b'mekaym kayin. Ois Kol Chavav, the Mechaber said, V'halacha kidvarav, the Mechaber said, we paskin like the second yesh misha omer, who's machmir, and who says not to go up. Well, says the Mishnah Berurah, not so fast. V'ha'achrayim kasvu, the Mishnah Berurah says that the achrayim right. Who are these achrayim? So if you look at the Shar Tzion, knows Kat Lamed Zayin, he brings this down in the name of the Lavush, Lechem Chamudais, the Knesset Agdola, and the Shari Ephraim. The Achrayim Kasvu, he says the Achrayim right, the Kahayim nowadays, Naihagin Ha'olam Kahayesh Oimrim Kama. The meaning of the Welt Firtzach, like the first Yesh Misha Omer, like the first opinion here in Sif Daled, that is Mekel, and says that you are allowed to go up for the aliyah. Va'afilu b'karu Yisrael, even if we're talking about a Yisrael. So certainly there are a lot of other Yisraelim who could take his place. Va'afilu b'karu Yisrael, v'hu oimed be'emtza Krias Shema, and you're in the middle of Krias Shema be'emtza prakim, you're still allowed to go up. After nucha lahasig Yisrael acher, even though it would be very simple for another Yisrael to go up and take the aliyah, still in all, says the Mishnah Berurah, in the name of the Achrayim, we're noyig nowadays, even if you're in the middle of Krias Shema, be'emtza perek, they call you up for an aliyah, you go. Afa pikein, noihagen, shemafsikin, mipnei kavod HaTorah. Levad, ihu oimid bepasuk Shema Yisrael, u'baruch shem k'vod b'achusay le'lavoid, except for the case where they call you up and you're holding in the middle of the pasuk of Shema Yisrael or in the middle of the pasuk of Ubaruch Shem, anywhere from Shema to Va'ed. If you're holding anywhere over there, you can't be mafsik. Then lo yafsik be'emtzayin, el lo yigmareim. Now, it doesn't take long to say Shema Yisrael, Shema L'Kedesh, Shema Chad Baruch Shem Kvad B'Chlusai, L'Olam Va'ed. So if they call up Yankel ben Shmerel and he's holding in Shema Yisrael, so he could get up and start walking and finish to the end of Baruch Shem Kvad B'Chlusai, L'Olam Va'ed, and then he could be mafsik. Ach, im yuchal maher. Oh, no, I skipped something. Ve'ein l'shanis haminig mipnei machloikis. And he says here that we should not change the minig. This is the established minig nowadays, to take the aliyah, and you should not change from that minig, because if you're going to stop being machmer, you're going to cause a machloikis. Ach, however, nevertheless, says the Chafetz Chaim, im yuchal l'maher l'sayim ad haperek. Let's say they call you up for an aliyah, and you're holding in the middle of Lakel Baruch Ni'imais Yitenu. So hurry up and finish the Baruch Hashem Yoitzer HaMa'oros. So now you're bein aprokim. Or you're holding in the middle of the Ahavta, so hurry up and finish the Uvish Arecha. So now you're holding between the first parsha of Krias Shema and the second parsha of aliyah B'Shamayah. So you're up to Ben Aprokim, because definitely Ben Aprokim is more kal than Be'emtza Aprokim. So says the Mishnah Berurah, we're noyig nowadays that you should be makel and you should go up for the aliyah. But if you could hurry up and finish to a place where you're Ben Aprokim, you should do that. Achiv yuchal amar l'sayim ad haperek yamar. V'im eino yochal l'sayim ad haperek. If you cannot hurry up and get to the end of the section that you're in, yesayim al kol panim lehecha desalik inyana. You should at least get to the end of a phrase, the end of an isolated phrase. In other words, the end of a topic, the end of a sentence that makes sense the way it is, and now you're starting something new. At least get up to there. I'm trying to think of an example. That's an independent thought. It's in the middle of a pasuk, but it's an independent thought. I'll give you the rain on your lands in the proper time. The early rains and the late rains. Then it says, You'll gather in your grains, your wine, and your oils. But these are independent thoughts. So at least get to the end of an independent thought. Don't be mafsik right in the middle of a thought. Achla, akev b'shvil zelo ya'akev. But if somehow you have to go up and take the aliyah even in the middle of a thought, you should do so. Amnum, however, says the Mishnah Berurah, now that we've established that you're going to paskin like the second Yesh Misha Omer, and you're going to be makel, and you're going to go take the aliyah, now you have to know how to be noyig when you do take the aliyah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Amnam, lo yikra imachazin. Usually when you have an aliyah, you read together with the Balkaire in the Sefer Torah. You're in the middle of Krias Shema, do not read with the Balkaire. Lo yikra imachazin. Rak sheyir lahatos oznoi v'lishmaya mimenu. You should pay careful attention and you should listen to the Balkaira. Certainly, after your aliyah, you should not look at the gabbai and start telling the gabbai that you want to make a mishaberach. What are you being mafsik for a mishaberach? V'nira, however, it seems to the Chavetz Chaim, the im be'emtza mishaberach. Let's say the gabbai, you finished the aliyah, and now the gabbai is making you a mishaberach. So he goes, mishaberach, and he doesn't remember your name. So he looks at you and he asks you your name. What do you do now? If the gabbai forgets his name and asks him his name, you're allowed to answer him. You can tell him your name. Why? Now covered. Because of the covered abrius of the gabbai. Because if the gabbai doesn't know the name and he's going to stand there like a fool, he's going to stand there, hu yavarech es, and you're not going to say your name, he's going to be, he's not going to know what to do, he's going to get fachatet, he's going to look silly. So for his covered, for the gabbai's covered, you're allowed to be mafsik and you're allowed to go tell him your name. Now you finished the aliyah, and now you want to return to your recitation of Krias Shema. Ein tzarich lachzar rak l'makom shapasak. You don't have to go back to the beginning of Krias Shema. You just go back to where you were up to. If you were up to Hishamru lachem pen yiftal avavachem, that's where you go back to. Afilu, and the Mishnah Berurah says that's true. Afilu hayaparsha arucha, even if your aliyah was a very long aliyah. Maybe they called you up for the first aliyah of Parshas Kisisa. No, it's the first. It's a very, very, very long aliyah. So they called you up for a very long aliyah. You were in the middle of Krias Shema. They called you up for the first aliyah of Parshas Kisisa. It's a very, very long aliyah. It took 6 minutes. So it took you more than the amount of time it takes to lay in the Gans Krias Shema. Still, you don't have to go back to the beginning of Krias Shema. You just continue from where you left off. Well, this makes sense because this is what we learned in Siman Samach Hey. The only time you have to go back to the beginning is if the reason you are mafsik was because of an oinus. If you are mafsik because you have to go to the Beis HaKisei, so that means that you're an oinus and you cannot say Krias Shema, you're not allowed to. You're forced by something exterior that you cannot say Krias Shema because you're not roi to say Krias Shema. Or when you're in the Beis HaKisei, you're not roi because you're in a makom where you're not allowed to say Krias Shema. In that case, if you had a hefsek kidei ligmar skula, you have to go back to the beginning. But over here, when they called you up for an aliyah, that does not constitute an oines. You went up. They called you up, and you agreed to go up because the halacha is that you go up. But that's not called an oines, that you can't say Krias Shema. So, Mamela, you don't have to go back to the beginning. Continues the Chavetz Chaim, v'chol zeh b'di'eved shekvar karu oisai. The other thing we need to understand that this is all a b'di'eved. This is only if the Gabbai called you up. Aval lechatchila, afilu oimid b'Birchas Krias Shema, even if you're only holding in Birchas Krias Shema and not Krias Shema itself. V'cholshkein b'Krias Shema atzma, but certainly if you're holding in the middle of Krias Shema, lo yikru oisai afilu ein sham kayin elohu. Don't call this guy up lechatchila. You see, he's in the middle of Krias Shema. Don't call him up for an aliyah, even if he's a kohen and he's the only kohen in the shul. Don't call him up for an aliyah if he's in the middle of Birchas Krias Shema or he's in the middle of Krias Shema. The lekalamechish bazel pegama, and the Gabbai will say, well, I had to call him up for kohen. He was the only kohen in the shul, and if I didn't call him up for kohen, it would be a pegam in his yichus. Says the Mishnah Berurah, no. The lekalamechish bazel pegama, because like we said, we're not worried about pegam. Since everybody sees he's in the middle of saying Krias Shema. Rak yikru li Yisrael b'm kaimai. Rather, you should call up Yisrael b'mkaim kayim. Umuta l'kraisai b'shmai v'yomer b'mkaim kayim. And you could call up, even though there's a kayin sitting there, you could call up Yisrael in the regular way, Pliny ben Pliny, and you say b'mkaim kayim. However, says the Mishnah Berurah, v'yesh chalkin, there are those who disagree with this. V'oimrin, and they say, T'gam b'zeh shaykh p'gam al-kayin, that we do have to worry about the p'gam of the kayin, because even though the kohen is sitting there and davening, not everybody understands that he's saying in the middle of saying Krias Shema, where he's not allowed to be mafsik. Venera, and it seems, says the Chavetz Chaim, the yesh lismaichu lahakel l'kraisai imu oimid b'bein haprakim. Says the Mishnah Berurah, you could be mekel, and you could call up the kohen if there's no other kohen, if he's bein haprakim of Krias Shema. But he says, v'yoyser taiv, Chavetz Chaim says the best thing would be im ein sham kayin elahu, if he's the only kayin around, sheyelech mebeis hakneses kaidim sheyikru la'rishai. If this kayin sees that he's running late and he's holding the middle of Krias Shema and they're about to lane, and he chaps that he's the only kayin, so he's afraid that they might call him up, he should walk out of the shul. He should go outside for a few minutes. V'chein adin b'levi, so too by a Levi. Venera Pashat. Now the Mishnah Berurah says another interesting thing. We're speaking here about Kavod HaTorah and Kavod HaBrias. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Venera Pashat. It seems obvious. If they went there, they took the Sefer Torah out for laning, and they put it down on the bima. And there's no Baal Kairei. They put the Sefer Torah down on the bima, and everybody walked away. There's no Baal Kairei. Ki im zeshu oimid b'Kriyas Shema b'Chleisah. But there is a Baal Kairei in the shul. But he's holding in middle of Kriyas Shema or in middle of Birchas Krias Shema. L'kulei alma yachal lahafsik b'mnei Kavod HaTorah. Then everybody would agree that this Baal Kairei is allowed to be mafsik in his Kriyas Shema or in his Birchas Krias Shema to go lane. Because it's not Kavod HaTorah, that the Torah should sit there on the bima with nobody coming up to lane. However, in benokel hu l'sayim loy b'tchila at perek, but if this Baal Kairei could finish to a point of ben haprakim, Yesayim, he should do so before he goes to lane. V'gam yimna oz atzma mili yishu ha'kairei b'sheim ha'kru b'sheyalu la'HaTorah, and also the Baal Kairei, who's in the middle of Krias Shema, should not also act as the Gabbai, because he can't say Mishaberachs, and he can't say people's names to call them up. He's in the middle of Krias Shema, he's in the middle of Birchas Krias Shema. So Achim Benokal will assign him at Chila a Perek. But if the Balkari can finish to a point to Ben Aprokim, Yisayim, you should do so. Gam Yimna Ozasatzma Mili Yisua Kairi B'Shem Akur B'Shiyalu L'Tar Mitam Hesek. And also, says the Mishnah Berurah, the Balkari should not double as the Gabai. Since we're talking about a case where he'd have to be mafsik in his Krias Shema, he should not serve as the Gabai. Okay, even though we have Sif Hay to do, which is the bulk of the Shulchan Aruch on Kuf Amud Beis, but we did just about all the Mishnah Berurah here on Kuf Amud Beis. I'm going to stop over here. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah, discussing limud HaTorah. Shemi Megan, Agam Klai Yisrael, the Rosh Hashem Shisen, Yeshua, Sephorus, Parnasit, Shetuchim, to all those in need. And we should be zechus to see the BS Girl Tzedek, B'meher of Yameinu, Amen. Be well.